With an important general election coming up in November, there are some important dates to remember before the election and information you need to know as it approaches. On this week's Community Perspective, we hear from Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab, who talks about the voter registration deadline, early voting, and the importance of poll workers and voting in general. He also speaks about a special election in March, the presidential preference primary, not held in Kansas since 1992. We're here this morning with Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. How are you?
It's a fantastic day outside, and you've spent your day your morning so far in Ottawa.
Yes, I have. It's always good to be back. Got a lot of friends down here, so work and also saying hi to some of the fine people of Ottawa.
All right. Well, I'm glad that you're here this morning. I want you, if you could, just to give a short introduction of yourself and then what your job as Secretary of State involves.
Yeah, my name's Scott Schwab. I grew up in Great Bend, Kansas. Got my communications degree from Fort Hays State, and then I got a job with the Kansas Farm Bureau and moved to the Kansas City metro area. Met a wonderful woman in Johnson County who will not move to a rural area because she's got to be within 4 miles of a target.
Of course.
But it's always good to come back to rural Kansas, kind of go back to my roots. Got elected to the legislature in Olathe in 2002 and got sworn in 2003. And then and I've served as chair of banking committee and vice chair of tax and chair of insurance, chair of elections for several years. And then became speaker pro tem and then had an opportunity to run for Secretary of State in 2018 and got reelected just last year for another 4-year term.
And here you are.
And here I am. Yeah.
Right. Well, congratulations there.
Thank you.
Your job as Secretary of State, we'll talk in a few minutes about some of the things that people may not know that your job does. One of the things heavily has to do with elections, and we're approaching a pretty important election coming up.
Yeah.
Can you take a few minutes and tell us about some of the things that are coming up in the next few weeks that people may need to know about?
Yeah, well, Tuesday is the voter registration deadline. So if you've had a name change or an address change or you've just never registered to vote, please go ahead and either go to our website, which is sos.ks.gov or votekansas.gov, and then just click on check your registration and you can see if everything's current. And for you young folks out there, if you're 17 years old, but you will be 18 by Election Day, go ahead and register by Tuesday, and you'll be able to participate in the election. And, we always say it, but sometimes we often forget it. These local elections impacted day-to-day life more than the decision for president and what's going on in D.C. So we always encourage folks to engage because your school board, as we found out during the pandemic, can literally take away you as a student's ability to play sports.
Correct.
And so it's very important to engage and make sure you get to choose who's going to represent you on that board.
And I don't think some 17-year-olds are out there thinking about that. Hey, I get to vote in the next election. So if you're a senior in high school or maybe a junior, depending on how old you are, if you're 17, going to be 18 in the next few months or a couple of weeks, actually, get out there and register. Register anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
And voting is always a very, very important part of our lives. I've always said that, if you're going to complain about things, vote.
Exactly.
And take care of business. A lot of younger people want to get involved. A lot of older people want to get involved. Register to vote, and you can hopefully take care of some issues.
Yeah, I always say, you're a shareholder in your community. And when you don't vote, you give your vote to somebody else that may not agree with you, and that vote becomes more stronger. Because if there's only 3 votes in an election, those 3 votes carry a lot of weight for the whole community. If there's 3,000, you disperse that power amongst the people.
And we've had some votes around here decided recently by one vote. So
yes.
Every vote counts. That's not a misnomer. Every vote counts.
It is absolutely important.
What other things are coming up? I know voter registration is due Tuesday.
Yes. And then we also, and I got notes here, and I want to make sure I stick to them. That way I don't embarrass myself. But October 16th is the first day of advanced voting. So a lot of folks, if you enjoy that mail ballot and you file that application by 16th, those will start going out. Make sure you get them turned in. Again, go to votekansas.gov. You can track your ballot to make sure whether or not they got your application, if your ballot's been sent, and if they've received your ballot.
Is there an application deadline for that?
There is. It's going to be 2 days before the election. So that's going to be as soon as you can. But the election day is going to be the 7th. The Sunday before that will be the last day of early voting. So make sure you get in. And we always encourage folks, if you make an application for an advance mail ballot, do not put it in the U.S. Postal Service unless you have to, because you just never know where that ballot's going to end up. Sometimes our clerks get ballots a year late after the election, even though they're legally cast. You can turn them in at the clerk's office or any polling place or early polling place in the county.
And some do have drop boxes outside their courthouses. I know Ottawa has a drop box for early voting.
Yeah, and I know those are sometimes controversial, but that drop box is significantly more secure than the blue one that the post office uses. So we encourage, feel free to use that drop box to drop those ballots off in.
And we're hoping a lot of people do vote in the upcoming election. One of the things that you talked about earlier, well, at a chamber coffee here in Ottawa, was the presidential preference primary. And I'll be honest, I don't even know what that is. Can you run me through what that is and the history of it?
It is. So I always like to make this point. Last year when I ran for re-election, I had a very ugly primary and accused me of being an election cheater. And then in the general, I had a contested general and was accused of not doing well at elections. Well, my Democrat opponent became chair of the Democrat Party. My Republican opponent became chair of the Republican Party. Now they get to run an election called a caucus for who they think should get their delegates for president. Well, they got intimidated and asked me to go ahead and do an extra election. So, or they thought if we couldn't do well, now they're like, but yet you still do it better than we do. We rarely have a presidential preference primary. And the word preference is because normally if you have a primary, whoever wins that primary, their name is on the ballot in November. This time, that's not necessarily so. So if you remember in a caucus, I believe it was Ted Cruz in 2020, or maybe it was 2016, got most of the votes for president through the Republican caucus, but then Trump ended up being the nominee in 2016. What they've decided is rather than do a caucus, they're just going to have the clerks go ahead and carry out a typical election, and that's going to be March 19th of next year. They'll be after Super Tuesday.
Okay.
And how those delegates are assigned as a result of that election is up to the rules that the parties make. And I believe the Republican Party just passed their rules. The Democrats are about to. And it's almost a $5 million statewide for this election to occur, but we engaged with the governor's office and the legislature to make sure that they've reimbursed counties for the administration of that election, because this is an additional election that we rarely have. And again, that's going to be March 19th of next year. I know normally when we have poll workers, they're normally August, November, but we're going to need some for March. So you got a great clerk here, and Janet Paddock, she's been around for a while. She works great with our office. Please reach out to our office to engage in that.
And just to put the point across, you're not going to be voting for the president in the March election.
Correct.
It's a preference.
It's who you prefer you want to vote for in November.
Okay. Gotcha. And then they can narrow those candidates down to...
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, hey, if you're wanting to vote for Tim Scott or was it Ravi Vizwemic, I can never get his name right. Maybe they're not, after Super Tuesday, they drop out of the race. They may still be on the ballot. So it's kind of an odd dynamic, but it's what the legislature wanted to do. But regardless, it's an election. If there's an election, we encourage people to vote in it.
You talked about, or you just mentioned poll workers.
Yeah.
And poll workers are a huge part of every election. I know that Janet Paddock in Franklin County always is working on getting poll workers in to help at the polls. Could you comment on the importance of poll workers?
Yeah. So if folks are concerned about voter suppression or if they're concerned about voter fraud, the best answer to that is be a poll worker, because you're the one with the eyes on the election to make sure there's integrity and people are treated within their constitutional rights. But also, you're also pulling off a giant civic duty. There is no question that elections are a function of government, or you can't privatize those. But the neat thing about Kansas is you can be as young as 16 and be a poll worker. And so through our Student Serve program, you can get the day off school, you get paid by the county, and you get credit in school. I mean, you can miss school and still get
trifecta
credit.
There.
What am I missing? And for you students that are trying to get scholarships or maybe apply to a university someplace that has qualified admissions, this looks fantastic on a resume. We really are engaging more young folks because after the pandemic, a lot of our seniors didn't come back as poll workers. The ones that didn't exactly grow up in the digital age like our teenagers did. I don't know about you, but when I get a new iPhone, I hand it to my teenage son and say, fix it, do the thing, get it to work, and then give it back when you're done. It's not much different in elections. Sometimes the seniors struggle a little bit with the technology we use to secure elections, but those teenagers get it. It's very intuitive to them.
Like that. And I know here in Ottawa, Franklin County, I apologize, Janet Paddock tells us that she needs up to 100 poll workers to run an election. more in a big general election. So
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'd also encourage folks that if you're a state legislator in Franklin County, which I only got a handful, or if you're a county commissioner, you can be on a poll worker as long as your name's not on that ballot. So as policymakers, I always encourage them to take that opportunity, because then when someone says, well, why don't you X, you can say because Y and Z.
Gotcha. All right. So you heard it, county commissioners, city commissioners, get out there and be a poll worker, help out the cause. Let's talk for a minute, if we could, about the other duties that the Secretary of State has, collecting certain records for businesses, certain publications, things that most people don't know about. Yeah,
it's interesting because it's nice to be Secretary of State, because I am elected. I do get to affect and serve the state in a great way, but I can also go to the grocery store. Most people don't even know who I am, which is kind of handy, as opposed to you're a member of Congress. You can't exactly hide when you're at the grocery store or at a restaurant. But back in our state's founding, in the Constitution, we put in governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, and treasurer. And a lot of those were simply defined back then. You have your governor, you got your backup governor, you got your attorney, because you need an attorney, and then you're going to need a treasurer, someone to handle the books, and a secretary, which is basically the filing office for all things related to the state of Kansas. As government grew, as economies grew, eventually they need a secretary just for agriculture. They needed a secretary just for revenue. They needed a secretary just for commerce. The things that didn't go there stayed with our office. So business filings stay with our office. And some folks, well, why do I have to file my business? Well, if you file your LLC with our office, then you can go to the bank and apply for a loan. But if you apply for a loan, they're going to check our website to make sure you're an actual entity. Also protects the business owner in case you build a business called, Tom's ABC Car Wash, and somebody realizes you're doing good, so somebody else tries to register with their office as Tom ABC Car Wash, and they hijack your name and take your business. And that's the last thing you want. And an update on that, we are updated our computer system. So as of January, instead of filing every year, you'll be filing every other year. Now your fee, you'll pay a 2-year fee, but your fee's not going up, but your administration is going down, because now you only have to worry about that every other year. So it's relieve some of that administrative burden on some of our small businesses.
What are some of the publications that you're responsible for? Yeah,
so a lot of times legislature will say, hey, upon publication in the register. Well, what's the register? It's the state official document that says this is so. It became very well known during the pandemic, because every time the governor did an executive order, it took effect when it was published in the register. And those come out every Thursday, and you can go to sos.ks.gov and see those. Attorneys often use it a lot because they want to know if a law has become into effect yet, or if there is an executive order, they want to know when it's posted so they can tell their client, okay, this is the actual order, and here's what compliance would look like. And we've been doing that since our founding, because if it's not published there, the only other way it can become legal is when we publish our statute annotated. So when the legislature gets finished with wrapping up all the laws, a lot of them, they take effect July 1, which is the beginning of the next fiscal year. That's when we'll print our statutes annotated. So if it's not in the register and it's not in the statutes annotated, it doesn't exist. But normally think of register, it's emergent, it's urgent, needs to be done now. Statute, for the statutes annotated, that's for the next fiscal year.
All right. Is there any other duties that you have in the office that we haven't discussed? I know there's probably a lot more.
There's a lot of little ones. We deal with county and municipal cemeteries, because we don't have a secretary of cemeteries, but yet you want them registered because there's a lot of regulations that go through that. So those are filed with our office. And then also we deal with the handing over of a cemetery. Let's say there's a cemetery that has a private board and it goes insolvent. The county has to take that over. So we work on that transitions for the county to take over those cemeteries. Doesn't happen often, but sometimes it does.
A lot of little things out there.
A lot of little things.
In every department, I'm sure, that people don't realize. Well, I want to go back to the election.
Sure.
Really, really quick. I know the election process coming up. Let's go over the dates again that are coming up, of very important dates.
Yeah, so again, this Tuesday the 17th is a voter registration deadline. Again, it's not just whether or not you're registered. You have to make sure your information is correct. If you had a name change, go ahead and re-register. If you had an address change, re-register. And I'm going to throw one other thing in there. If you've had something that caused you to change your signature. Like my mother-in-law had a stroke, so her signature has changed. We would encourage you to go ahead and re-register so they get that updated signature so that your ballot doesn't become provisional. Then obviously November 7th, you want to make sure you've voted by then. If not, get in there and make sure you know exactly where you're supposed to vote. And if you're not sure, just go to sos.ks.gov and your information is there. Just click on the elections tab, click on the voter view, and you can see your information there. And obviously, you can always reach out to Janet's office.
There you go. I was going to say you can always go down to the courthouse and check that out. Whatever county you happen to be in, check with your county clerk. They'll fill you in on all your registration. You can change things right there, too.
Yes.
If you're not comfortable online, you can change things right there. So head on down to your county courthouse and double check. Remember, you have to be registered to vote by the 17th, which is Tuesday. So remember that. And when does early voting start?
So it's going to start the next day. So you can, advanced mail ballots will go out the next day, or military ballots will go out the next day. And I can't remember what day Franklin County starts their early in-person vote.
I believe it's the 23rd, which is the following Monday.
And this is what I like about Kansas elections is it's locally funded, locally administered, so it caters to what their needs are. Johnson County, they're going to have it a little bit earlier than that, but they have a higher volume. Obviously, some of our more rural counties don't need to staff and pay rent for a polling place as long simply because they have less volume. But regardless, if you're not going to be around on election day, but you still want to cast your ballot in person, which is always the most secure way to cast your ballot, go ahead and find those advanced voting places and go in and get it done.
Anything else about the election that you want people to know about?
If you have concerns with the election, if you believe some of the YouTube videos or some of the conspiracy theories, whether it's about fraud or whether it's about voter suppression, go be a poll worker and learn the process. And then if you see something you're concerned with, you'll have the credibility because you've done the deal. You didn't get your information off the internet.
There you go. All right. So if you got concerns, definitely go out and get involved in the election process, and you'll be able to learn all about everything you could possibly want to know about elections. So we'll do that. I'm going to give you the final word. We've been talking with Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. I'm going to give you the final word. What do you want people to absolutely know about the upcoming election?
It's yours. This is your election. This is your community. And you cannot complain about property taxes. You can't complain about school administration. You can't complain about sales taxes or the hole in the street you might have by your house or the quality of snow removal if you're not even voting for the people and getting out there and voting for folks. I'm going to tell you, elected officials, when they get a complaint from somebody, they do check to see if you voted. Obviously, they can't see if they voted for me.
Exactly.
But the quality of your complaint goes down when someone says, you don't even vote.
What are you complaining about?
Yeah.
There you go. Well, we've been talking today with Kansas Secretary of State Scott Schwab. Thank you for coming in. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, thank you so much. Honored to do that. And hey, Ottawa, go out there and win some championships.